this is the one thing I wanted to talk to you guys about. It was here it is. So I know that I know most of you guys know. Well, besides Xbox and Phil Spencer and whatever they stepped down or anything, but that's not important. Anyways, the PlayStation CEO faces massive backlash at the following baffling Bluepoint mismanagement and shutdown. So they shut down Bluepoint. So I'd be very curious to see what's the reason here and why. It's kind of crazy to
People are
hear
still
this. I
reeling
was
at
not
the fact
expecting
that
this.
Bluepoint got shut down by Sony and PlayStation, which feels like one of the dumbest decisions they could have made, given the potential that
It's almost like that one time when Xbox shut down that one studio that made that one game that they shadow dropped on the Xbox showcase, I think, or Summer Game Fest. What was the name of that studio that Xbox shut down? I don't remember. It was Sunset something. I don't
Bluepoint
remember.
has to shine under Sony and PlayStation's leadership if you give them the right project. I mean, Demon's Souls remake is a testament to their
Especially
capabilities,
just crazy, and
combined
Bluepoint
with
getting
all
shut
the
down in
other
the same time is
remasters and
crazy.
remakes
Yeah,
that
it
they've
almost feels
worked
like a
on,
coordinated
whether
attack.
it's Uncharted, whether it's
And the
Metal
Xbox
Gear
CEO has their
Solid
accounts managed by
HD
AI.
Collection, or whether it's, Shadow of
Is it AI
Colossus
boyfriends,
remake,
though?
so on and so forth. Jason Schreier broke the news via news outlet Bloomberg, talked about how
This is the
70
most craziest
employees
one to
were
hear.
laid off, and how prior to their shutdown, they were working on a God of War live service that was canceled by Sony and PlayStation. And it was shortly thereafter that,
Really?
as they searched for the next project for Bluepoint to work on, they eventually decided that they needed to cut costs and that Bluepoint of all studios had to go complete nonsense.
I wonder why they need to cut cost. I wonder why. It's not like they lost so much money or so on a video game that they released, not that long ago.
And the reaction online has been disbelief, bafflement, as well as ire and fury. In fact, Sony and PlayStation, having sensed this, they actually went radio silent on social media for some time as the backlash began. If you go to PlayStation's Twitter page, for example, you'll find that they haven't posted anything since February 19th.
Oh my God,
and there's
really?
a social media page that literally posts on a daily basis multiple times. You can see right here, February 18th, multiple posts. February 17th, as we scroll further down, multiple posts.
Damn,
They
so
post
they've been
regularly.
radio silent,
Their
huh?
radio silence is actually quite rare. And that had in large part to do with the fact that this tweet went up shortly after the announcement that Bluepoint would be shut down, them promoting Marathon, a live service, right after Bluepoint got shut down.
This is gonna be Concord right here. This will be the other Concord.
Because Sony is more focused on live service endeavors. And they also set Bluepoint up for failure by signing them the God of War live service
the
that
Hi-Fi
they
Rush one,
canceled,
that's
giving
the one.
Bluepoint a project
Yeah.
that they didn't really
I was trying to remember what it
specialize in,
was.
and then blame them for it because after their business reviews, Bluepoint just wasn't meeting whatever expectations they wanted Bluepoint to meet. Now, it is worth highlighting that based on an investigation recently conducted by Detective Seats, who spoke to sources within Bluepoint, former employees and whatnot, this God of War live service was initially pitched by Bluepoint to PlayStation during their work on God of War Ragnarok as their next game. But in part, this was influenced by the fact that Sony and PlayStation wanted to do live services. So this was the pitch that Bluepoint made that got approved. During development, Bluepoint realized they were way in over their heads, missing various deadlines, and results being less than ideal enough that Sony eventually decided that they needed to shut the project down. Then they tried to pitch multiple projects to PlayStation, but those were turned down. And with nothing happening with Bluepoint, eventually PlayStation decided to shut down the studio. Not to mention, Bluepoint kept bleeding talent because they had nothing to do because God of War live service failed and because their pitches kept getting turned down. And so while sure, some could argue that Bluepoint was the one who pitched this God of War live service, it was under this kind of overall mandate to push for more live services within PlayStation Studios as a whole. And the fact that Sony and PlayStation greenlit Bluepoint.
Man, PlayStation just really wants to make just a bunch of live service games, don't they, huh? Even then, we knew about, they were working on, 7 to 8 live service projects, and most of them got shut down. We only got a few of them now at the moment. Well, Concord died anyway, so there's that. And then, what is it? The Horizon game was also the one that's also a live service game that was announced just a couple of days or a week ago. That was also part of the 8 or 7 games that were supposed to that was being made or so, And I think that there's one more I don't remember what the name of that one specifically is, but it's like a version of a Payday. It's like 3v3 or so, where you steal from the rich or something like that. I don't remember the game specifically, but that's also one of the other. I think that's also one of the other projects or so. The for Sony's live service, the Western division of Sony is so tunnel vision for live service, and they're shutting down more that they release. This funny thing about it, apparently, like internally, PlayStation is having like some kind of civil war. So, Sony of Japan and Sony of America, where basically Sony of America, it's an own like conglomerate like monster itself, because they're waiting, like Sony Japan wants Sony of America to fail so they can absorb them back in and they can take full control of, you know, of their shit and everything. We saw a video specifically explaining what's been happening or so internally in Sony in general. They hate what Sony America is actually doing, to be honest. It is actually, well, at the end of the day, it is their fault for them making a Sony of America. So, and that's when it all began when it started censoring a bunch of anime games and censoring everything, because at the end of the day, Sony is a Japanese place and they are well known for their Japanese games, you know. But unfortunately, well, when they had the Western, when they did their Western HQ, that completely went down into the shitter, you know. And they started and I remember when they censored Devil May Cry 2 as well back then. Basically, Bluepoint tried to present new IPs or remakes, but Sony kept on rejecting them. So someone at Bluepoint realized to get a game out, they need to make a live service. So they presented that God of War live service. That's how I heard about the story. Ah, I see. Okay. Nintendo is following the same path. Yeah. That's the only reason why I swapped over from console to PC, because of the censorship.
Point taking on a God of War live service when they've never made a live service, with a source straight up saying that while the project sounded good, we really should not have been doing a live service game. It was out of the norm for us and our bandwidth, with Sony and PlayStation not having the foresight to assign Bluepoint.
This is literally the same exact thing what happened on the Xbox side, where they were making, what was the name of that one vampire game or whatever? They're well known of making single player games, first person single player games. I forgot what the single player game they're well known for. It's the same thing that just happened or so. They basically made them do a live service game, but they're not well equipped or how to do. There you go, Redfall. Yeah, it's the same exact thing. This is the same exact scenario, because Bluepoint is not well known for live service games.
Something different, something that they actually specialize in. In my opinion, Sony and PlayStation played an equal part in the downfall of Bluepoint, and them not giving Bluepoint the ability to ship something else, to work on something aside from the God of War live service, something that they're better at, be it remakes and whatnot. And some of those were pitched. Two of the projects that they pitched were, in fact, remakes. The fact still remains the same, that Sony and PlayStation ultimately still mishandled Bluepoint after their acquisition. We're just seeing a lot of backlash against Sony and PlayStation, and a huge loss of confidence in how they'll handle their studios and upcoming projects moving forward. And a lot of the blame is being shifted to none other than Hermen Hulst, who is in charge of Sony Interactive Entertainment's first-party endeavors. And this post also highlights just all of the high scores that Bluepoint Games releases have gotten. Demon's Souls remake, among others, like the Eco and Shadow Collection, Shadow of the Colossus remake, garnering critical acclaim, God of War Collection, Metal Gear Solid HD Collection, Uncharted Collection, Gravity Rush Remastered, all bangers.
I still have Gravity Rush on the PlayStation, so maybe one of these days we can play Gravity Rush. It'd be pretty fun. Also heard that basically the same thing happened to BioWare Anthem, because originally Anthem was meant to be a single player game, but the idea creator of Anthem knew EA was not going to greenlit unless they make it into a live service. Yeah, it was during that time or so where they wanted to make live service games to, you know, have that investment to, you know, milk as much of the player base, you know.
Beyond the fact that Hermen Hulst is in charge of PlayStation's first-party endeavors, he was also the one to sign this email that was sent to staff. Hermen Hulst, CEO of Studio Business Group, kind of spotlighting the achievements that PlayStation has been able to celebrate over the...
You know, the funny thing about it, we're never going to get any remasters. We're not going to get any remasters from this studio anymore. It would have been better if they were just the studio that made remastered games, because it would have, because then at least you have that pocket, that pocket money in the back or so, where they can just make these specific like beloved Sony IPs and then make these older games back into, new flesh and blood and everything. So, remember when the Sony of America CEO said that no one plays single player games, and the following month's Jedi Fallen Order shut them down? Wasn't it EA? I thought it was EA that said that.
last year, but also some of the
I
challenges
thought it was
that has
EA
led
that,
them to
that
make the
specifically said
difficult
that
decision to
line.
shut down Bluepoint. They talked about successes like Ghost of Yotei and Death Stranding 2 and Helldivers 2 and MLB The Show, but, quote, at the same time, we're operating in an increasingly challenging industry environment. Rising development costs, slowed industry growth, changing player behavior, and broader economic headwinds are making it harder to build games sustainably. To
I wonder
navigate this
why.
reality, we need to continue adapting and evolving. We have taken a close look at our business to ensure we're delivering today while still well positioned for the future. As a result, we will be closing Bluepoint Games in March. This decision was not made lightly. Bluepoint is an incredibly talented team, and their technical expertise has delivered exceptional experiences for the PlayStation community. I want to thank everyone at Bluepoint for their creativity, craftsmanship, and commitment to quality. Where possible, we'll work to find opportunities for some impacted employees within our global network of studios. And then he tries to put a positive spin on this, which didn't.
Well, sadly, remasters also don't sell well. That's why FF changed the Sony exclusive, because the people on the platform that swears up and down that they play games don't be playing new games. Yeah, but then the problem is, getting remasters, but then have them on all platforms would have been so nice. Remember, would have been so. I don't even think Gravity Rush is even available on PC. I don't think so, at least not to my knowledge, anyways. But it would have been so nice to have it on PC.
Not pan out well at all, saying, while I know
There's
this
so
is
many
hard
good,
news to hear,
like,
I am
good
confident
games
in the
on the
direction
Sony
we're headed.
platform, that are never
Creativity,
coming back.
innovation, and building unforgettable experiences for players remain at the heart of PlayStation Studios. Then why on God's green earth would you shut down Bluepoint, a studio that was well positioned to deliver exactly the goals you highlighted here: creativity, innovation, and building unforgettable experiences,
Apparently.
especially in the realm of remakes and taking old titles and bringing them into the modern era for new people
It's because the CEOs just don't want to lose money. That's why.
to become acquainted with old series. And especially when Sony and PlayStation's insistence to continue to shotgun spray until they hit a bullseye with
List of canceled PlayStation Live service games from roughly of the past. Concord canceled. Well, not canceled. It died. Unannounced God of War game canceled. The Last of Us multiplayer canceled. Live Spider-Man 2 multiplayer canceled. Ben Studio multiplayer canceled. Twisted Metal Fire Spike canceled. London Studios co-op game studio closed canceled. Deviation game and multiplayer game canceled. Payback third-person Destiny spin-off from Bungie canceled. Jesus Christ. That's a lot of canceled projects there. I ain't gonna lie, to be honest. And also, we're gonna add more of the list here specifically. What is it? The Hunter's Gathering. It's gonna be, what is it? The Hunter's Gathering is gonna be on this list. Marathon. It still probably won't be on this list though, but who knows? And then what's that one game? Intergalactic something bald-headed Asian woman is going to be on this list too as well. Not as in canceled, but more like dead though. But it's not a live service game, but it should be on this list at the end of the day, because they're the ones who are literally, it's part of Sony at the end of the day. Maybe we should probably just have a list or so of the games they've completely failed so far.
just the sheer volume of live services they're pursuing hasn't panned out at all, with plenty of folks now taking to highlighting all of the live service projects that either launched unsuccessfully and got shut down or were canceled
but
outright, including
I don't trust Sony doing a Twisted Metal live service game. Like, I really don't. When was the last time? What was the last time, you trusted Sony doing a live service game?
Points God of War game on top of like The Last of Us live service, Spider-Man live service, Ben Studios live service, Twisted Metal live service, London Studios co-op game live service, Deviation Games multiplayer live service, and the
2015?
spin-off Destiny Bungie game live service. all of them were canceled. Of their live services, only 3 have released and are still ongoing, with Helldivers 2 being the most successful. Concord was shut down shortly after its launch, and all the while you look at the cancellations list and it's far more extensive than the stuff that's been released. There are a few live services that are currently in development and are coming out in the not-so-distant future, like Bungie's Marathon, as well as Guerrilla's new announcement, Horizon Hunters Gathering.
That's the game it was called. That's the one right there. Fair Games. That's the one right there. This one apparently is going to be released. This one will be released. That Horizon game that's coming out. Gummy Bears from Unknown Studios. Interesting.
And we'll see how those will perform, I suppose. Only time will tell. But the general track record of Sony and PlayStation live services has been extremely poor. The way they've been handling their studios and their acquisitions has been poor during the PS5 generation with...
Oh, freaking Japan Studio, dude. Oh my god, I remember Japan Studio. Holy cow. Here, let me open that up for you guys. Holy shit, dude. Japan Studios, man. That is a game and a half, dude. Ape Escape, Shadow of Colossus, Loco Roco, Gravity Rush, and Astrobot. That's crazy, dude. That's wild to see that. Did they actually literally legit close it down or so? They did, back in 2021. Holy shit, dude. Fucking Neon, Pixel Opus, Neon Koi. I remember London Studios, Firewalk Studios. Yeah, I remember Firewalk Studios too as well. Yeah. Yeah, I knew most of these. Yeah. But the list of games though, oh man, dude. Hey King. That's crazy though.
This post highlighting some of the studios that were closed down over the last 6 or 7 years or so. Many of them beloved, and yeah, just the sheer amount of posts we're seeing highlighting Sony and PlayStation's failures when it comes to handling their studios and live services has been very prominent. And when you look at just how many of these games have been canceled and how many studios have been shut down, those claims are undeniable. Now, some folks are taking to blaming Jim Ryan, saying that Jim Ryan and Sony's overzealous live service push has got to be one of the worst decisions PlayStation has ever made, in my opinion. And it is true that his era...
Let me see. Hold on. Give me a second. So the Last of Us was pretty iconic. Cancel, meaning Naughty Dog are almost skipping an entire generation. The biggest flop ever in gaming history was Concord. Multiple live service games canceled, wasting time and closing studios, making Bluepoint do live service instead of another remake of a game people love, and then closing them down.
To be one of the worst decisions PlayStation has ever made, in my opinion. And it is true that his era of PlayStation leadership is among the most infamous. But right now, Hermen Hulst is in charge of first-party titles, which is why most of the backlash is being directed at Hermen Hulst, who is the face of PlayStation's first-party endeavors, the face of when things like mass layoffs happen or studio shutdowns, like Bluepoint in particular, is such a beloved...
That's what I'm saying. You have to meet a woman in order for you to get married. That's what I was saying. I'm like, you gotta meet a woman in order for you to get married.
But studio happens, which is why people are posting things like this, how it feels after the Bluepoint news. Oops, all live service games, and it's Hermen Hulst here as the face of all of this. Some folks are straight up fed up with Hermen Hulst and just flat out saying on social media, Hermen Hulst should be fired for his mismanagement of the games and studios under his umbrella and under his purview, and for taking PlayStation and Sony down the current path that it's headed towards. And if you search the name Hermen Hulst on social media platforms like Twitter right now, you'll find nothing but folks slamming Hermen Hulst, mocking him or criticizing and censuring him for the way he's completely mismanaged PlayStation following Jim Ryan's infamous leadership. Many hoped that Hermen Hulst, having come from Guerrilla Games and having made that studio successful, would take PlayStation in a much better direction than Jim Ryan did, but in many ways it feels like it's just a follow-up to Jim Ryan's era of ruling PlayStation and Sony Interactive Entertainment. And for those not aware of the leadership transition that happened between Jim Ryan and Hermen Hulst, What happened was that back in May of 2024, we got the following news that PlayStation names Hermen Hulst and Hideaki Nishino as its new CEOs. Once upon a time, these two were co-CEOs, with Hulst in particular being CEO of the newly named Studio Business Group, which includes all of PlayStation's first-party teams, plus covers the development of PlayStation IP onto other mediums such as TV and film. So that's what Hermen Hulst was in charge of, while the other side of the coin, Hideaki Nishino, would lead the Platform Business Group, which includes console hardware, technology, accessories, PlayStation Network, and third-party relations. Now, it is worth highlighting that on late January of 2025, we did get some leadership mix-up where Hermen Hulst was no longer co-CEO alongside Nishino. They were no longer at the same level of leadership position. Instead, Nishino was promoted to overall CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, while Hermen Hulst was kept as CEO of Studio Business Group. Less than a year after the co-CEO setup, Nishino essentially became the sole CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment and became Hermen Hulst's boss. While Hermen Hulst's position, CEO of Studio Business Group, has not changed and his responsibilities largely stayed the same, but likely with more oversight from someone like Nishino, who's now higher up than Hermen Hulst. And it's no coincidence that this happened just a few months after the launch of Concord, which was just an epic failure. It released on August 23rd, 2024. It made literally $0 because
Wow, it has really been 2 years since Concord's release? Damn. Damn, it's been that long, huh? It's been that long, huh? Wow. Felt like it was just last year that we had Concord, to be honest.
Weeks after launch, the game had to shut down.
Yeah,
they
it's
full-on
been 2 years
refunded
already.
everyone who bought the
Goddamn,
game, shut down servers, and the game was no
Damn,
more.
2
And it is
years.
believed that
2
hundreds of millions of dollars
years.
were spent
Goddamn,
by
dude.
Sony and PlayStation
Holy
on
Lord, time
acquiring
flies.
Firewalk
My
Studios,
God.
the developer that made Concord, as well as, marketing Concord and giving it all the funds it needs for it
Good
to,
times. Good
from what Sony
times.
believed, for it to become their next Star Wars. The fact that Nishino was upgraded to overall CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment and essentially became Hermen Hulst's boss just a few months after Concord's failure, it just seems like too much of a coincidence. It feels like those two events are related, where Sony and PlayStation became less
definitely
trustful
not. We're not gonna
of
get a
Hermen
spiral
Hulst
game.
having the same level of leadership as Nishino due to mass failures like Concord that cost Sony and PlayStation a tremendous amount of money. Now, I don't exactly know what went on behind the scenes. I don't know the exact reasoning for why Bluepoint Games specifically was targeted for shutdown. I don't know if it was fully Hermen Hulst's decision due to the fact that Hermen Hulst is not the true full-on boss of Sony Interactive Entertainment. He is in charge of first-party stuff, but he's still got higher-ups who can overrule him, whether it's Nishino or people even higher up from Sony itself, the parent company of PlayStation. But the fact remains that Hermen Hulst is still the face of PlayStation's first-party endeavors, so it's no surprise that a lot of blame would fall on him. And part of me wonders whether Hermen Hulst himself is happy with the direction that PlayStation is going in. Is he just adopting a business model that has been forced upon him, that Sony and the true higher-ups there are mandating? Because the thing is, being the head of a studio like Guerrilla and then being CEO of PlayStation's first-party endeavors as a whole, those are two very different kinds of jobs. Because when he was leader of Guerrilla Games, he was just focused on making the best games that they wanted to make. But then as CEO of PlayStation,
If I remember correctly, right? Guerrilla Games is the one that are making the Horizon, right? But this was they used to make good games back then, Killzone, I'm just saying, a new remake of Killzone would be kind of nice, or just remake, the first 3, Killzone games, or just remake the entire thing and make a collection or something like that,
he has
pretty cool.
Sony to answer to directly, and what Sony wants is for Hermen Hulst to ensure that the business is the focus and that the business is profitable. No doubt that Hermen Hulst's own priorities have had to shift because the goals of the corporation as a whole and being a CEO within that corporate structure means that Hermen Hulst's goal also has to be profits and revenue and much more monetization focused. Because on some level, no doubt that is the mandate from the people who are even above Hermen Hulst. But at the same time, Hermen Hulst is essentially the boss of Sony's and PlayStation's first-party endeavors when it comes to video games, and he makes a lot of decisions, and recent decisions just have not paved the road to something that looks like a successful landscape for live services. And in light of all of this, there's been a lot of conversations about the performance of single-player AAA games versus the potential money that live services can make. So for example, right here we have this interview from news outlet The Game Business with Matthew Ball, who's a leading video game advisor and author, who kind of talked about the numbers that are out there right now when it comes to how single-player games are performing. And here's a bit that caught a lot of people's eyes and has raised a lot of conversations on social media. It reads right here: "My conversation with Ball was around single-player story games at one point, and here's what Ball noted, quote, single-player narrative games are having a tough time meeting historical expectations. Tears of the Kingdom drastically underperformed relative to Breath of the Wild, despite Switch being larger. God of War Ragnarok versus God of..."
Well, freaking what? Tears of the Kingdom? What is that's the second game, right? Well, Tears of the Kingdom fucking underperformed because number one, the console is very like anti-consumer. Plus, also at the same time, you don't get the physical copy of the actual game itself to begin with. It's like they're kind of like blaming other shit in general. It's like, oh, it failed, or so single player games are not gonna do very well. I'm like, no, jackass. The reason why it failed or so, it's because of these specific reasons why Tears of the Kingdom failed compared to Breath of the Wild, okay? Oh, God, dude. Jesus Christ. And even then, Tears of the Kingdom, I played it for a bit, right? It just really felt like Breath of the Wild, but then all they did is just basically added an attic and a basement. As basically as in saying, like, they added like an open sky place where you can go up in the sky and then you can go underground. That's kind of like basically it. And then they made the weapon deterioration even worse, well, more annoying. And that's kind of like basically. Well, yeah, of course. They pretty much copied the same thing, and all they did is just added a basement. They added an attic, made the weapon deterioration even worse, and that's basically it. So. It wasn't really like super revolutionary or anything like that, you know, compared to its first game. But you know, that's why. So it's just so dumb. Or so it's like, oh, Tears of the Kingdom drastically underperformed related to Breath of the Wild, you know, despite the Switch being larger. That's not the thing. That's not the problem, you know.
For Spider-Man 2 versus Spider-Man 1, basically highlighting how sequels for a lot of these single-player AAA games...
Because Spider-Man 2 played it safe. That's the reason why it also underperformed as well. It's just like they're really not looking at the bigger picture. The reason why these games underperformed. They're just kind of like basically like blaming everything else but themselves. It just makes no fucking sense. Silksong sells really well. Expedition 33 sells. Stop fucking pandering and make hit whammy. Maybe they could just save them, but Code Vein 2 destroyed that.
Performed worse than their predecessors. While their launches were overall more explosive and sold faster during the launch period, in terms of the overall lifespan of the game and the tail ends of those games' sales, that's where overall the predecessors actually performed better than the sequels did. And what companies want to see, what corporations like to see, is growth rather than stagnation. It's not, again, about making enough money. It's about making more money and all the money and kind of giving investors the impression of unlimited growth. The statement continues, a successful hit here might sell 15 to 30 million units on the high end. And the game completion rates, the game complete trophies for The Last of Us Part 2 sit at around 40 to 50% mark. So 40 to 50% of people will finish a 30-hour story. If you mash that up with other data, we see that the older you get, the more likely you are to have disengaged over time, which is to say a man or a woman 45 plus plays games less today than they did 5 years ago. Matthew Ball also released a full-on analysis talking about all of the areas where gaming has seen tremendous growth, whether it's, like Chinese publishers and games that leverage the Chinese market. The mobile industry, when it comes to gaming, has seen a big explosion due to just how much ad revenue is been made, with mobile gaming advertising in particular having generated dozens of billions in gross revenue in 2025. Then you've got experiences like Roadblocks, which has 150 million daily.
Look at Crimson Deserts, graphic-wise, not that great, but it's still getting that hype on combat. No, the graphics are really good because it's its own engine at the end of the day. Not like Ko said, you can have hot whammy, but if the game is ass, it's ass. Game still needs meat and bones. So I personally don't side with the narrative to make all female characters super hot. Gameplay will always be king. Exactly, it doesn't really matter. For me, it's story-wise, of course, right? Gameplay and story is always the number one thing for me. I'm like, if the story is ass, I'm gonna hate it. If the gameplay is ass, I'm gonna hate it. Of course, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many big titty goth girls you add into the game. It's still shit. The game is still shit at that point, you know. So, and also on top of that, I feel like there's gonna be a suspicious feeling that I wouldn't be surprised if Sony starts making like mobile games, you know, later in the future to get that revenue.
Users as of Q3 of 2025, which is more engagement than Steam, PlayStation, and Fortnite combined. Basically highlighting how those are the kinds of numbers that executives look at when they're in positions like CEO of a major conglomerate like Sony and PlayStation. Those are the kinds of numbers that Hermen Hulst has to look at and try to pursue, whether he likes it or not, because of the position that he's in, who is responsible for appeasing to investors and ensuring that...
I don't know, just make a mobile game. Just go do mobile games if you want that, you know, maybe have a studio so that, you know, they can do mobile gaming.
His actions all are ultimately for the corporate interest of Sony and PlayStation, which don't always align with ensuring that they output the highest quality product or the most desired products from a company that overall specializes in those single-player campaign story-driven experiences, but are trying to move into the market of live services, which is so woefully oversaturated, and they're just like throwing darts in the dark until one of them hits a bullseye. Because if one of them hits a bullseye, they stand to make billions in revenue. They stand to make revenue that is at the level of like multiple successful single-player AAA games. But ultimately, this is a game of expectations and this corporate desire for infinite growth. It's not that single-player games are not viable as a business. It's just that live services stand to make more if they're able to succeed in that venture. And at the same time, when it comes to single player games, a lot of people feel like there's just a mismanagement of scale and budget. Legendary Drops, for example, highlights right here how Spider-Man 1's budget was $90 million, where Spider-Man 2, only 5 years later, its budget blew up to over $300 million.
Ay, Jesus Christ, what the fuck? It took... what? How's that even possible? How did it go from 90 million to 300 million in the span of 5 years? Somebody need to explain this to me. Hey Kitsune. Holy cow, dude, that is insane, dude. I feel like there's some fraud happening in the gaming scene, to be honest. Like, where does this money go? Where is all this money is going to?
Dollars. That level of inflation is just ridiculous for a budget. This is in response to somebody justifying Sony's recent actions and their focus on live services and shutdowns of studios like Bluepoint Games, which do not specialize in live services and are more about remasters, remakes, and single-player campaign experiences, justifying that as don't get mad at Sony for doing the rational thing and placing bets on the more profitable potential output. If you know single-player games are losers, you're better off attempting the live service route, even if 9 out of 10 of them don't make it. This is just rational business decision making.
Yeah, but you don't need to spend that much money or so to make a profit in a single player game, because take a look at freaking Expedition 33. It is the best example. Like, let's take a look at this real quick. So I'm gonna do this real fast. So, Player Obscure Expedition 33 was produced remarkably with a budget less than 10 million, covering both development and marketing. Despite this modest budget, the game has been massive commercial success, selling over 5 million copies by October of 2025 and generating approximately 175 million in net revenue, make it one of the most profitable games of the year. Now, we do this. So the Spider-Man, so was it 2018? Was it this one? Was it this specific one? I think it was. The 2018 was expectedly profitable title of the PlayStation that reported development and marketing budget around 90 million to and over 100 million. The game generated massively revenue and estimated placings the total, including the DLC, over 3.8 billion from more than 20 million units sold worldwide as of 2020. And then we do Spider-Man 2. So let's see. So the Marvel Rivals Spider-Man 2 for the PS5 had a total production budget of 315 million. Leaked documents indicated that the game needed to sell 7.2 million units to break even despite high costs. It is significant commercial success, having sold over 11 million copies within the 6 months. This game discusses a highly production game. So I believe those numbers because it's also the same thing with movies, how they struggle to make a profit. With Expedition 33, the devs got funding from Kepler. They alone could not make Expedition 33 what it is today. That is very true. Hey, Fuji. Let me see. Was a massive commercial success, becoming the fastest-selling PlayStation studio games in 24 hours. With over 2.5 million copies, it reached 10 million copies sold. It's just first 107 days, surpassing the sales pace of its predecessor. The game received high praise for its gameplay, though some players criticized the length of the story compared to the first game. Let me see. Profit success. Let's go. Profit success. Yes, it was. Okay. All right. Just making sure. We gotta get all the facts and everything right at the end of the day. So, but even then, the amount of money that they had to spend or so to fucking get this game successful is crazy though.
This is a take that has not gone down particularly well. Don't get me wrong, it is true that if you succeed with a live service, you stand to make a lot more money than if you were to succeed with a single player AAA game. But at the same time, the gamble that live services are in this day and age, because of the sheer amount of money involved in making them, the sheer amount of money involved in maintaining them, and the sheer amount of money that you have to recurrently make through your monetization schemes and having to capture the engagement of audiences whose engagement and wallets are stretched thin by just how oversaturated the live service market is, that makes that venture a lot more risky. It's high risk, high reward, whereas the single player games that people know and love, that's a safe bet if you continue the quality output you've been doing these last, decades. It's not that single player games are not viable as a business. It's just the fact that Sony and PlayStation's goals and ambitions when it comes to profitability are so high that the only way to achieve those is through successful live services. But
I think specifically, they put too much money in one basket and they receive nothing in return. They put so much money into a video game or so, and they want to they want to get so much money back in return for investing all of this money. But at the same time, you don't need to invest that much money in a single player game, You really don't. If fucking Expedition 33 can do it with that specific budget, Sony can also do the same thing. If you want to turn these single player games into a profit, you don't need to put that much money into it. But for some apparent reason, they have a specific mindset where they put so much money into a video game, they get no return investment at all, I don't know what they spend that much when Black Myth is estimated around 45 to 70 mil. I have no idea. Well, I can give you a good reason why. It's because of California. That's the reason why. I think the cost to make games have gone up because good luck getting PC for your employees. That is true, but let me see. I'm gonna search this up real quick. There it is. So most of Sony Interactive's entertainment PlayStation primary games development studios in America are located in California, specifically in San Francisco Bay Area and the Southern California. Major central hubs include the San Mateos, Los Angeles, and San Diego. San Mateo Studios, Santa Monica, Los Angeles, San Diego Studios, Naughty Dog, Santa Monica, Insomniac Games, Burbank, California. They're all in California. That's the reason why they're spending so much fucking money, is because all their studios is in California, dude. If they would have moved these studios into like other places, like in other different regions, I think the budget would be a lot less, to be honest, on spending money wise. But since California is one of the most expensive fucking places to live and one of the most expensive places to, to work at, of course, I feel like it's bloated. I feel like it's way too bloated. California's just way too bloated in general. I blame California in general because of why they have to why they have to pay so much money for these goddamn fucking games to be made. That's the reason why.
But that endeavor is incredibly difficult to achieve.
I'm like, if I was the CEO and everything like that, I would just literally just move the studios out of California at that point. I would. I'm like, where would I want to like go where it could cost less and we can invest less and make more profit in return,
Again, it's not about enough money through single-player games that steadily increase the company's reputation and value.
Pretty much,
it's about wanting explosive growth through...
One California dev is equivalent to at least a handful of devs in other specific parts of the world that can do the same thing, if not better than them. I'm just saying.
Through successful live services that they hope they can nail at some point by making as many of them as possible through as many IPs as possible, through as many studios as possible, including ones who have never made a live service. And so with all said and done, to me, that approach feels like an incredibly short-sighted way of tackling things. And the fact that single-player games are being touted as too expensive and development costs, getting too high up there, when it's a choice to make your budgets that high. When there are plenty of examples out there of budgets that are significantly less than, say, Spider-Man 2's $300 million and are still able to deliver a really special experience like Expedition 33, when you see the possibilities that you can achieve when you can actually keep your budget like reasonable and work within those limitations, there's no excuse for your games to be overinflated in budget and therefore setting it up for failure, because suddenly now that game, because of how high the budget was, it has to sell, tens of millions of copies instead of being able to be successful just by selling, say, like 5 million units, and if it sells more, even better. This continued insistence on using rising development costs as an excuse, when these companies are the ones who set themselves up in an environment where development costs are rising.
As ChatGPT, the question: has the cost of games gone up in the recent times? And the result is interesting. I recommend to also do the same thing or ask a similar question. Well, my question is, so look, so my thing is, right? Let's see. How much does it cost? So the building of a high-end AAA level gaming studio in California, similar to Sony Santa Monica or Insomniac Games, is a massive financial undertaking, likely costing hundreds of millions of dollars over a 3 to 5 year development cycle. A single AAA title today often requires a budget of exceeding 100 million to 500 million, covering team salaries and high-end hardware, marketing, and California's high operational overhead. So the facility and the office setup of the studio's employees required a large office space, blah, 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 blah. So estimated setup for a 4-person team is 75,000, but the scaling to 200 plus employees brings this into the millions. Hardware, high-end hardware, workstations, and everything will cost you several millions of dollars. Softwares and licensings can cost you another 100,000. Operational costs and staffing. Salaries in California. Senior talent is expensive. A common rule of thumb is a fully loaded cost. Salary plus benefits plus tax. Roughly around 10,000 to 16,000 per developer per month. Team size for 300-person studio. This equates to 3 million to 4.8 million per month in labor cost. Annual operating budgets. The large studio can easily have an annual operating budget of 50 million to 100 million dollars just to keep the lights on and the staff paid. The production of the development cycle cost. So the development cycle of a AAA game takes about 3 to 5 years to develop, with budgets for development alone, not including marketing, frequently exceeding over $100+ million. Content creation cost includes professional voice acting, orchestrated soundtracks, and motion captures, and blah blah blah. Kind of depends on different elements. California specific costs: rent and utilities. Office spaces in Southern California and the Bay Area is among the highest in the nation. Legal and taxes, setting up the complying of California's regulation and paying the 800 plus minimum annual franchise taxes. So the total estimate cost, for example, to create a studio capable of producing a game at the level of God of War like Santa Monica Studios, you should be estimated the initial setup between 5 to 10 million, office and hardware licensing, annual operating costs, which is 60 to 100 million, salary, rent, and utilities, 3 to 5 years of a budget, which would be 200 million to over 500 million. Marketing alone for AAA can be over 100 million. So note that these figures assume that the AAA studio models, which is defined by a large team, high quality art, and an extensive marketing budget, often surpasses 100 million for a single title. So this is the reason why it's so expensive for these games, is because number one is because of California. That's why. All of the studios, now how many studios were there in over there in California? Roughly about 5 studios in California, basically, from Sony. You times that by 5 and you get your estimate how much money Sony is basically spending or so for these studios to be alive. Even though they could have just moved these studios to somewhere else and it'd be a lot more better, a lot more profitable for them, and it will cost less for them to keep the lights on instead of keeping it in California. So that's what I'm saying. Hey, Starfall. It's literally just straight up just because they have all the studios literally in the conglomerate area in California. They all have it in the same specific area. And they're paying, 5 times the amount.
Instead of thinking of ways to mitigate those kinds of costs and keep the budgets reasonable, blaming an environment that you set up for yourself 100%. For destroying beloved studios like Bluepoint just makes it that much more infuriating that a studio as celebrated as Bluepoint met such an unceremonious and such a tragic demise just because PlayStation didn't frickin' know how to utilize them properly. They could have not acquired Bluepoint and let them continue doing their thing. They probably would have been still alive today. But no, with Sony and PlayStation having put Bluepoint in an environment where they were bound to fail in, they did a business review and then said, sorry, you didn't do well enough under the circumstances that we gave you, instead of giving Bluepoint the opportunity to really shine under Sony and PlayStation with the kinds of experiences and the kinds of projects that they're experts in. So yeah, look, I don't know exactly whose ultimate decision it was to shut down Bluepoint Games. I don't know the exact logistical reasons behind why that happened. What we do know on a public level, on a public-facing level, is that under Jim Ryan's tenure as SIE CEO, Sony and PlayStation have started to move in a direction, this live service-focused direction, that a lot of people saw as foreboding, and Hermen Hulst, instead of turning it around, just only continued that, whether, again, all this was ultimately the mandate of these individuals or the mandate of people even above them. It feels like Hermen Hulst, whether voluntary or not, has lost a piece of who he used to be when he was head of Guerrilla, now that he's become CEO of PlayStation's first-party endeavors. You can tell, priorities have shifted, again, whether by his own decision-making or someone higher above him. Either way, it sucks to see.
Well, remember, right, when Concord was being made or so, he wanted Concord to be as big as Star Wars. Remember that he had all this thing planned out, had comics planned out for Concord, had TV shows planned for Concord, had a bunch of other shit planned for Concord and everything like that, that was basically, that's why I'm kind of like looking at it like, I don't think it's a higher up. I think it's just legit just him in general, to be honest. I have my suspicious eye on him specifically, So, hey, Hazu. If I want Code to make a game, I will ask Code to live in Malaysia or your birth country. Hell no, I will let you make a game in the Western soil. Even then, where I live specifically, it's not really that expensive over here. So, like, honestly, it's really not. So, where I live specifically, like, it's pricey to some degree, but like, it's not really that bad or so. It's really not that crazy. So, I'm pretty a-okay where I live. So, they plan a whole extended universe of that bullshit.
To hear what your
That's what I'm
thoughts and
saying.
opinions
It's
are on
California's
all
fault.
of this, and to be
It's
further
literally-
updated.
It's just literally just California's fault at the end of the day. The reason why everything is expensive over there. The cost of everything is expensive over there. The living over there is expensive. You have to start paying more of your employees because of it for them to live a little bit more comfortable over there. And then, the cost of games are also more expensive. The hardware is now more expensive. Now everything just kind of starts falling, kind of like falling in line when you start looking at everything in general, not just like, oh, why is the cost of video games so much or so? Well, the cost of video games aren't much is because of these factors. That's the reason why video games start costing more now. As long as you're using a USD, you should be fine anywhere except the USA. I blame you on this. I had no part in this. It's literally just straight up California. It's just California in general. That's just it. After looking at that specifically, and especially how many studios that Sony owns in California, it's kind of like, I was like, Jesus Christ. I can kind of see why they're trying to do live service games to pay off the cost for these things, to keep the things in, it depends, because even in Japan, mobile games productions have gone up over the years. It's not just the US. Let's see. So, let's see. Let's find out in a second, see if we get some information on it. So, opening a AAA title game studio is generally significantly less expensive in Japan compared to California, primarily driven by lower salary, overhead, and operating costs. While both regions have high-cost urban centers, California, particularly the Bay Area and Los Angeles, suffer the higher inflation, wage premium, and rental costs that inflates AAA development budget. So, the cost comparison of Japan versus California, the labor costs in Japan's AAA developers typically earn significantly less than their Californian counterparts. For example, a senior developer in Japan might earn around 13 to 14 million yen, which is 85 to 95k USD, while equivalent roles in California often exceed 150k to 200k. Some reports suggest a 50 million game in the US can be made for roughly 4 million in Japan due to the lower wages. The cost in living in office space, while Tokyo is expensive, it is often cheaper than California's tech hubs. A 2024 comparison found that the Los Angeles rent was 169% higher than Tokyo, with a 53% higher median salary. Production costs. Japan studios can often produce higher quality or equivalent looking games with a fraction of the budget compared to the Western counterparts. The studio setup, starting a studio in Japan offers access to highly skilled, specialized talent pool that is often more cost effective, though Japanese work culture can bring different challenges such as strict hierarchy and high pressure. So the summary of the cost. So the developers of moderate is between 40 to 90k USD, while a Californian person from LA and San Francisco would be 100 to 200k. The commercial rent is a high, but lower than California. California is extremely high. Operating expenses is lower. California is very high. The best factor is lower overhead, high efficiency, while California is a high access to the top diverse talents. In the summary of the new studios aiming for a AAA status, Japan offers more cost-effective environment, allowing for lower operating costs, but it requires navigating a different labor market than the cultural business practices. So there you go. So that pretty much kind of like basically says that, you know, if you want to make a profit or so, Japan is just a more better place to open up a studio compared to California. It's just straight up just California's fault, bruh. Like, no joke. It's just California. California is the reason why, you know, because all of the studios from Sony, at least like the first major ones, at least that they list or so, were part of, you know, are part in California, especially in the Bay region. So that's the reason why. I blame the tech bros. Can we nuke that place already? We gotta get rid of California, to be honest. That's all I gotta say. The C in California stands for cooked. The cost of money is what it costs, you know? That's the reason why, you know? That's why they're like overspending so damn much, because they're trying to subsidize the cost or so from the bills that they have to pay to keep the lights on these studios and everything, you know? So that's the problem. But yeah. Yeah, in comparison, you got it. Cali is just cooked. My point costs have just gone up because I wonder if we got some JP people and asked them if things were cheaper to set up a studio back then compared with the current times. Yeah, that's why, you know, we always look up these information specifically, and this is probably why one of the main reasons why, you know, like I said, like you could probably get a handful of developers, which is the same price as a one developer in California, you know. That's the reason why. But yeah, overall, that's basically it. So, like I said, it's just California's fault, and plus also Sony of America is just not really good at managing their fucking shit. You know, they could have just literally moved their studio somewhere else where it would cost less. I'm just saying, but apparently not. They're not gonna do that. So what do you think, you know? I'm like, it's a smart business move to move your business somewhere else that costs less on renting the property itself, so you don't have to pay too much, so you can earn more income. But I don't know what Sony America is thinking at the end of the day. Hey man, you know, at the end of the day, it is what it is. If you want to do your own research after being in JP for vacation, just imagine 10,000 yen as 100 USD. Didn't a corporal cut down on the Western Division recently? I forgot which. Oh, I have no idea on that information. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, they could probably like I said, they could probably like invest in single player games if they move the companies somewhere else in a different part of America, right? That doesn't cost too much, right? And they probably don't have to spend over like fucking 200 million on a single player game and expect to get, you know, fucking 300, 400, 500, or whatever expectation they want specifically to get generally to cost the balance or so. You can just literally just invest, like, let's say for example, like 50 million or so on a single player game, you know, right? And then they get in a return investment of like, you know, 150 million or something in return. That's still a net positive at the end of the day, you know? But they're not going to do any of that stuff, so it is what it is at the end of the day. Hey man, they do them at the end of the day. If they want to keep doing this and leave their studios in California, hey, be my guest, you know. Sony JP needs to stop sucking dick and close Cali studio already. Unfortunately, Sony of America is its own conglomerate monster, so they're basically waiting that Sony of America literally fails for them to suck them back in, basically, you know. And once they do, JP Sony will have full authority right over you know, PlayStation in general. So, but we'll see what happens. Well, anyways, that's the end of the video, and just wanted to talk about it specifically. That, you know, it's kind of shitty what happened to Bluepoint. In my personal opinion, it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. But yeah. Anyways, that's the end of the video. And yeah, we always do our research here, no matter what. So we always look up some stuff and making sure that we get everything kind of down and narrowed and everything. So, but yeah.